Have you ever just stopped and looked around and wondered why our planet is, well, green? It wasn't always this way. Today we're going to unravel the epic 500 million year story of how plants went from simple pond scum to the massive trees we see today. It is one heck of a story.
So yeah, that's the big question, isn't it? How did Earth get its green blanket? How did life manage that incredible jump out of the water and onto dry land, eventually covering pretty much everything? This isn't just a story about things growing, it's a story about survival, incredible innovation, and, yeah, a total conquest.
And you gotta understand, this wasn't some passive accident. Nope, this was a full-on 500 million year campaign. Plants were like inventors, constantly developing these brilliant new technologies to solve huge problems and colonize every last corner of the globe.
All right, so where do we start? Well, like pretty much all life on Earth, our story begins in the water. Long before any plants were on land, their ancestors were already thriving there, and we're talking about algae.
So what are algae really? Well, at their most basic, they're pretty simple organisms with chlorophyll. Their body is what scientists call thalloid, which is just a fancy way of saying they don't have separate parts like roots, stems, or leaves. But don't let that simplicity fool you. These guys are the absolute foundation of almost all life in the water.
And when I say simple, I definitely don't mean boring. The variety is just wild. You've got everything from tiny, single-celled organisms like Chlamydomonas, all the way to these amazing, intricate colonies like Volvox. I mean, look at that. It's like a tiny living sphere.
And their importance? Oh, it's massive. Algae are absolute workhorses. Get this, they fix about half of all the carbon dioxide on Earth and pump out tons of oxygen. They're the very bottom of the food chain for all aquatic animals. And we humans? We use them for everything from food, like the stuff in sushi, to the agar we use in science labs.
Okay, so we can break algae down into three main classes: green, brown, and red. And what sets them apart? Well, it's things like the specific pigments they use to grab sunlight, the way they store their food, and even what their cell walls are made of. Take the red algae, for example. They have this special pigment that lets them live super deep in the ocean where other light can't reach. It's a perfect example of how specialized these organisms got.
So life is thriving in the water, but eventually it starts eyeing up the shore, and the very first pioneers to make that huge leap were a group we call the Bryophytes.
You know, the best way to think about these guys is as the amphibians of the plant kingdom. It's a perfect metaphor. See, they could live on soil, but they were still tied to water. Just like a frog needs water to lay its eggs, these plants absolutely depended on it for sexual reproduction. And you can really see how they were still in between worlds. This here is a liverwort. Notice how its body is still kind of flat and simple, that phallus-like shape again. No true roots or stems. Instead, it just has these tiny little anchor threads called rhizoids to hold on. Okay, now this is a really important point. The main green part of the plant you're looking at is called a gametophyte. And what that means is that its cells are haploid. They have only one set of chromosomes. It's kind of like having just half of the genetic instruction manual. That's a huge difference from most plants, you know, and definitely different from us animals, since we have two sets.
So the Bryophytes were a great first attempt, a real foot in the door. But to really conquer the land, plants had to solve two massive problems: how to get water from the ground up to their tops, and how to fight gravity. Basically, they needed a way to reach for the sky.
And the solution they came up with? It was an absolute game changer. The next great leap forward was basically the invention of an internal superhighway.
We call this superhighway vascular tissue. Think of it like a plant's internal plumbing. You've got xylem, which are tubes that pull water and nutrients up from the roots, and you've got phloem, which transports sugars from the leaves down to the rest of the plant. This was the breakthrough. This is what finally let plants get tall and stand up to gravity.
So say hello to the Pteridophytes, ferns and their relatives. They were the first plants to have this amazing superpower. Just look at this horsetail. For the very first time in our story, we're seeing a plant with what we'd recognize as true roots, a true stem, and true leaves. And it's all thanks to that vascular plumbing.
And this totally new body plan also came with a huge shift in their life cycle. Remember how the main bryophyte plant was haploid? Well, with pteridophytes, the script is flipped. The big, dominant plant you see is now the sporophyte, and it's diploid, meaning it has two sets of chromosomes, just like us. That little haploid gametophyte stage, it got way smaller and less important.
Okay, so vascular tissue let plants get big and start to really take over the landscape. But to go from just being on the landscape
to dominating the entire planet, that took two final brilliant masterstrokes, the invention of the seed and the invention of the flower.
The seed. What an incredible invention. It's like a little self-contained survival pod for the baby plant. The first plants to figure this out were the Gymnosperms, think pine trees. Their seeds aren't naked, just sitting there on the scales of a cone. But then came the Angiosperms, who took it to the next level. They enclose their seeds inside a protective ovary, which then develops into what we call a fruit.
And the Angiosperm's other secret weapon? The flower. Now, flowers aren't just pretty, they are highly sophisticated reproductive machines. And they allow for this totally unique process called double fertilization. It's kind of amazing. One fertilization event creates the embryo, the baby plant, but a second one creates the endosperm, which is basically a packed lunch for that embryo. This 2-for-1 deal is a huge reason why flowering plants have become the most successful plants on Earth, by far. So we've walked through all these different groups, right? From algae to bryophytes to ferns, and finally seed plants. It seems like a lot of change, but believe it or not, there is one fundamental pattern, a grand cycle that connects every single one of them.
It's a concept called alternation of generations. And here's the gist. Every plant in its life alternates between two forms. There's a haploid version, the gametophyte, that produces gametes. And then there's a diploid version, the sporophyte, that produces spores. They switch back and forth, generation after generation.
And the big story of plant evolution is really about which of these two stages is dominant. Way back with the algae and bryophytes, the haploid gametophyte was the main show. That was the plant you saw. But as plants got more complex and conquered the land, the trend completely reversed. The diploid sporophyte became the big, dominant plant, and the gametophyte got smaller and smaller until it was just this tiny, almost invisible part of the process.
So let's wrap this incredible story up. You can really think of it as a 4-act play. Act 1, algae set the stage in the water. Act 2, the bryophytes make the first daring move onto land, but they're still tied to the water's edge. Act 3, the Pteridophytes invent that internal plumbing, allowing them to grow tall and truly start dominating. And finally, Act 4, the seed plants, the Gymnosperms and Angiosperms, absolutely perfect reproduction on land with the seed and the flower. What a story.
I mean, it's just an incredible saga, isn't it? From a single, simple algae to the massive redwood forests and everything in between. Plants literally terraformed our planet. They took a barren rock and turned it into the living, breathing world we know. Which leaves you with a pretty big question, doesn't it? After 500 million years of brilliant evolution, what on earth could the next great leap for plants look like?